Hey, it's the 300th episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast, and we're answering your questions. Let's go.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the 300th episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu. And we're doing something we haven't ever done in 300 episodes. So now we actually asked you, hey, do you have questions? And we were stunned by the response. Let's just say we have enough content ideas for the next 300 episodes.
We'll ask you again in 5 years if you have questions, because you've given us enough.
Don't give us, ask us no more questions. It'll take us forever to answer all of them. So I guess maybe that would be my one caveat I want to say on the front end. If you're not hearing your question answered, don't think it wasn't a good one. There were so many good ones, and we will eventually be getting around to answering it, probably maybe as a whole standalone. So don't feel too bad if we're not getting to your question. We may spend a whole episode on it.
Yeah, definitely. There's some that, would group into similar themes or were asked, basically the same question asked a different way. I want to tell you, listener, I am super impressed with you. This is really, I'm still processing this, Scott, the questions that we got.
Dozens and dozens and dozens. Overwhelmed.
Overwhelming response. And so, first of all, they're excellent. 99.9% of the questions are excellent. They're also really heartfelt. I think you really responded with actual things that you're facing in ministry. And I'm so appreciative of hearing that, because it's really going to steer us in some particular directions to try to address things that are helpful to you, which is why we exist. It's also very humbling that you guys, just the way you asked your questions, that you obviously you put a lot of trust in us for providing good answers to you. We take that very seriously. And so that's how we'll be addressing them. But overall, man, I'm just so excited. We didn't really do much celebration for our 100th or our 200th episode. And honestly, we didn't really plan much for this one either. But with this idea, I think this is a great way to celebrate our 300th episode. And thanks to you, it's you guys that have made it. I think this is a good episode. We're going to answer 8 questions today. But what you've provided for us now in the future, I'm blown away by.
It's a gift. Yeah. We've got content for a long time. In the preparation, though, that we did for these episodes, I did want to think a little bit about places where we may have 300 episodes is a lot, and we have covered a lot of ground in them. And every single episode has an article along with it. If you are part of the Healthy Churches Toolkit, don't sleep on the fact that the search function is really good in the Healthy Churches Toolkit. And so if you've got a question about a particular topic, go into the Healthy Churches Toolkit, and just at the search bar that's on the top of every page, type in that term. And if there's a resource, but also if there's a relevant article or podcast that we did on it, that's also in there. So if you've got a question about a topic, I do just want to point you to that resource and go, we've got a lot of really good content. My other side note, I just want to say, while I'm extremely overwhelmed and humbled by the response that we got from the question that we sent out, I'm a little disappointed with our audience as well.
Are you?
I am.
Oh.
Not a single personal question. No one wants to know anything about us. Just, not one.
I think that's good. I think we need to be reminded, yes, we're producing public media. No, we are not celebrity by any measure. So thank you for that too. You couldn't care less about either one of us or some ridiculous thing. You're like, you know what, guys? I'm over here doing hard ministry. I'm just help.
Get over yourself and get to the good. Get to the good. So that's a great transition. AJ, you got the first question.
All right, here we go. All right. Scotty asked, what principles you use to make decisions about the future of local church ministries, whether to continue, improve, or end them, so that the local church remains engaged in its primary mission of discipleship. All right. So these are making tough decisions.
It's not me, by the way. You said it's from Scotty.
Scott, yeah. I never call you Scotty on the podcast.
I know that, but I just thought, since this was the first question and we're like, oh, there was this overwhelming response. We're like, oh, from Scotty. Like this is a Scotty. Sorry.
This is a different Scotty.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, this is where the tough decisions get made. In our strategic envisioning process, we do mission, we do values, then we do discipleship pathway. And that's the hard part. That's where we're beginning to make tough leadership choices around ministries and systems and processes and this kind of thing. So what are the principles that we use to make decisions about this? Well, there's two aspects to this. First, it's the values work that we do before we get to this question, sort of. And in the values work that we do, we go into Acts chapter 2 and we look at verses 41 through 47. And what were the behaviors that the first century church was doing at Pentecost, at the birth of the church of Jesus Christ, capital C, worldwide? What did the apostles and the Holy Spirit lead these people to be doing? And it's great stuff, and it's perfectly applicable to us today because God's word is good for all people in all places for all time. And so that is our first measure, okay? Some people have variations on the exact things out of there, 5 to 7 things that you see, but roughly worship, prayer, fellowship, evangelism, like generosity, service, being in God's word, like instruction, teaching. I think I got them all. And so that's kind of our first measure. So do the ministries of the church support or enable us to live out one or more of those values? If it doesn't attach to one of those values in a pretty direct and meaningful way, that is a criteria in which the ministry may not be of tremendous discipleship value in the church. So that's my first half to the answer. The other part then is a tool that we use, again, in the strategic envisioning process. After working through a few steps of evaluating ministries, organizing and evaluating the current ministries of the church, we have a tool that we use called the decision matrix. And the decision matrix, again, this is the hard part, guys. We're not telling you this is easy, but the decision matrix is where we take the information that we've discussed about each ministry and we make a decision. Is this a primary ministry in the church that we're going to invite everybody into? Is this a secondary ministry that supports before or after the primary ministry or has a direct connection to get people engaged? Or is this something perhaps that we're going to sunset and let it begin its path to no longerness? Or is this something that should be canceled right now? Or maybe it's an event that we did and we're just not going to do that event again. So that's how I would answer this about making decisions about ministries or the principles that we use to decide on whether a ministry has value, whether it should continue. So I hope that's helpful, Scotty, not Ball. All right, a few more to go. Scott, your turn.
All right. My first question comes from Mark. Mark asked, with all of the materials that exist online and books and things, why should a church, or what is the benefit of a church working with a consultant rather than just kind of running something yourself? And this is a great question. This is a common question that we get when we're talking with a church, particularly maybe not the person who reached out to us, because if you reached out to us, you see some value in it. But if we're talking with a church board or some council or group or committee, this might be a common question that comes up. And so I would answer it in a couple of ways. The first would be the main reason is you may not have the buy-in from the rest of the group when someone on the team is leading the process, because everything will be shaded by that person, what people perceive as that person's kind of tipping the scales. In particular, if it's the pastor who's leading the process, people maybe won't feel the permission to speak up and go, I disagree. Or they may, even if it's a very open process and everybody's participating, the feeling may be, yeah, but, Pastor John led this process, and so it's really his thing. It's his vision. And so by having someone external come in and guide the process, particularly in the way in which we do it, which it's a facilitated process, it's not typical like business consulting where you might come in and do some workshop and facilitation, then we deliver to you, here's what you need to do. You do these things. We don't do it that way. You're in the driver's seat the entire time. We're facilitating the process, and the end result then is owned by the group. That gives a lot of confidence to the church that this isn't one person's idea, that it's something that we built together. So that would be the first reason, is that it removes the perception that it is one person's vision that's being sort of foisted upon the rest of the church. The second reason would be that, let's just say you're an exceptional leader and you got all the right ideas and you know everything there is to know, and you listen to the podcast and there's not a single new thing that you've ever learned, whatever, that's fine. I would say even if you were the best surgeon on the planet, you're the number one heart surgeon, you're the number one whatever kind of surgeon, you wouldn't perform surgery on yourself. You wouldn't prescribe yourself medication. You wouldn't do that. It's not ethical to prescribe your own medication, but also it's not. You don't have the perspective that's necessary to conduct the surgery yourself. Certainly, if it's open heart surgery, you'd need to be out for that. But even if it was something laparoscopic, like even if it was something else, you wouldn't perform that surgery on yourself. It doesn't matter how good of a surgeon you are. The act of performing the surgery on yourself is nearly impossible because you lack the perspective to be able to do it well. And so having someone from the outside isn't a sign of weakness or that you don't know what you're doing. It's actually a sign of humility and a sign of wisdom, because you're having someone who has a perspective that you don't have help to guide a process, that it's not a reflection of your competence to have someone else help you. And then finally, the last thing I would say is we've worked with a number of churches that have gone through self-guided processes, and then they end up contacting us in the end anyway, because they don't really know. And I mean this in all love and sincerity. Like, please don't take this the wrong way, but a lot of you don't know what you're doing. And so you're cobbling together your own process by reading different articles online. And so you're not using a consistent framework. I'm not calling our process better than anybody else's, but there's real value in committing to one process and framework and working that process correctly. And when you don't do that and you don't hit sort of the timeline and schedule the right way, it ends up taking twice as long or 3 times as long. You lose a lot of momentum and you lose a lot of, you lose face with the congregate confidence. People like just don't believe the leadership can do anything. And it really hurts the church in the long term. Working, especially with us, because we're so inexpensive in comparison to a lot of other options, you end up getting further faster at a lower price than if you try to cobble something together on your own. So that was a longer answer than yours, AJ, but those are the 3 reasons why I think it's valuable to work with someone outside and not try to do it yourself.
Sounds good, man. That was a good one. All right. My next one is from Billy, and he asks, how do I start? I'm in a church that clearly needs revitalization, but they don't realize it. How do I show them that there could be more and they could be dying a slow death over the last 10 to 15 years, or that they have been dying a slow death? Yeah, this is a question that we get quite a lot in various forms. And so I've got 2 points that I would say about this. As it reads, it kind of sounds like you feel alone. A lot of pastors do, or elders, or whoever our contact might be. I would start with some leadership conversations first. I hope you have some kind of a board that you can trust and meet with, elders, church council, whatever form that might be. So I would broach the conversation first in your leadership decision-making circle, and at least get this conversation started and out in the open. How do you guys feel about where we are? Do you feel ever that perhaps we're not living up to the potential that God has blessed us with? So I would first start with some leadership conversations and let that, breathe a bit. Have these conversations over, not a long period of time, over a short period of time. And begin to see where the consensus is on that. Certainly be praying about it. Be praying individually and together about it. If you find you have consensus, then I think the best way to begin to introduce this to the church, and we always advocate for full transparency with the church, that, we believe God has called us to something greater than we are, and we're beginning a prayerful investigation into how we can improve as a church, or what positive changes we can make that will allow us greater mission effectiveness, making maturing disciples of Jesus. The next thing I would say is we've got an analysis that we do called the church ministry analysis, this assessment that the church can go through that asks some pertinent questions for 6 areas of church health. And providing actual data to the congregation is going to take the emotional element out of it, or perhaps anybody feeling like, there's been any sway one way or another, people with agendas, and be able to just give them real information back. It's a series of statements that people can agree or disagree with. It's not intended to be taken by the whole church, but by active ministry leaders. But this provides then some substantial data that can be presented, again, with love and care and sincerity as to where the church is and where its opportunities lie to be in a greater position of health for, again, your mission effectiveness. So that's what I would say, Billy. Start with the leadership conversations, move into some detached assessment that can help you reflect back really where you are right now. And then from then, hopefully you have the consensus and the human capital that you need to be able to make a plan then for, well, how are we going to address this? What's going to be our next step after this? So great question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Okay, and a common one. I had one on my list that I'm anonymous. That was a very similar question. So I would echo everything you just said. So my next question comes from Gary. Gary says, what are the best ways to start a person on a path towards leadership in the church when that person can't see themselves leading anything, anytime, anywhere?
Yeah, that was a good question. I like that.
They don't see themselves as a leader. How do you help them begin to see themselves that way? And that's one of the things I love about our leadership pipeline process is that in the leadership pipeline process, we call leaders, everybody from the your frontline volunteer, all the way up to a, like an elder or deacon or whatever your senior level leadership board is. We call those folks leaders. And so starting by recognizing that you have leadership obligations, even from the very beginning. So you may not see yourself as a leader, but you are one. It starts by learning to lead yourself. We all have an obligation to, under the headship of Jesus, to lead ourselves, right? He leads us by still waters, but we follow him and we are leading ourselves to follow Jesus, right? So it starts with leading ourselves and maybe helping someone understand that the leadership journey doesn't mean that it has to end at becoming an elder in the church. That there's a leadership place for you, no matter where the ceiling ends up sort of being for you, and there's potential in you that needs to be developed. If you're a parent, if you're a dad, you are a leader in your home. If you're a mom, you're a leader in your home. If you work in a business, maybe you're a frontline employee at Best Buy. You're leading customers to buy products. It doesn't matter. Just redefining what leadership is, not making everything is leadership. I'm not trying to suggest that, but seeing the opportunities for leadership and leadership development in the small things is actually the best path to helping someone become a leader in the great things. So my advice, Gary, would be help people begin to understand the ways in which they are already called to be a leader, and then create what we call core competencies, but clear competencies for leadership that are sort of a stepping ladder up along the way so that people can be developed up to those standards. I think one of the biggest challenges that churches face is what they want is to be able to microwave a leader. I think that's something that our friend Adam said. It's like people are looking for prepackaged leaders, but you can't microwave a leader, and you don't buy them on the shelf at Walmart. Leaders must be developed. Don't be discouraged that when you look around, all you see is a bunch of people who aren't very qualified to be an elder at your church. See a field of opportunity and go, all right, there is a bunch of people that we can be developing and help them begin to understand how they're leading already, and then give them clear competencies to aspire to so that they can grow and help them develop to those competencies. I would encourage you to go back. We did a whole deep dive on Leadership Pipeline. I think, AJ, was that last summer or 2 summers ago?
Oh,
I think it might have been last summer.
I want to say last summer, but you know how these go, Scott. The years blend together. We
gave a lot away for free, I'll just say, in those episodes. I would go back, Gary, and listen to that entire series, and it will really help you with this.
Check today's show notes for links to resources such as that, or YouTube description, wherever you're at. Okay, yep. Here's our next one. This is from Chad, and he asks, how do I stay strategic and visionary as a single staff pastor who has to worry about the minutia of day-to-day operations? And boy, is this a common issue that I know probably few people verbalize it and many feel it. So I'm glad you asked this, Chad. I've got several things that I want to point out for this. First one I want to mention is really developing the habit of or the discipline of calendaring well. Friend of mine would always say, if it isn't written, it isn't real. And I think the calendar helps us do that. So actually devoting time to this question and this way of thinking, and you're kind of asking two things, strategic and visionary. So I would be thinking about those separately, because I think they're different. They're different thought processes, and I think there's different mechanics to them. So I would be separating strategic and visionary, though they are linked. So calendaring, first of all, devote time to it. The minutia of the day-to-day ends up becoming what drives our time. And it happens to the best of us, that the urgent matters end up just consuming the day. And before we know it, we've pushed what we wanted to do to hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to do this. The calendar is a tool to help you with that. Next, and I'm thinking more on the visionary side here, prayer time and quiet time. So, and again, calendar, put that on the calendar, so that you've got protected time for that. But spending time in prayer, and in the Word, thinking about the visionary things, asking God for His vision for your church. And I do believe that even in the minutia of the day-to-day, every pastor has more vision than most give themselves credit for. One of the kind of simple thought tools that I suggest to a lot of pastors, especially if you've been in the work for a long time, is try to take yourself back to either your initial call to ministry, maybe, or your initial pastor position after seminary, or even maybe your most recent one, whenever you changed churches. Try to bring yourself back to that moment in time when this opportunity began to unfold before you and how you felt about it. Because choosing that direction, hopefully in prayer and discernment, you also chose it with vision, because you could see your fit in the ministry or in this church. You could feel or see the future and what you thought you were going to be able to do there, the effect you were going to have on people's lives, or how the church was going to be different than it was then. All of that is vision. And I think a lot of pastors miss that, oh, I was living in a moment of vision. So try to bring yourself back to that in your prayer and quiet time. Number 3, just the simple fact of being intentional. That kind of goes back into the calendaring. But when you're having meetings with your volunteer teams, you need to be intentional and continue to have the language with your teams as well. Use the word strategy. in relation to your ministry decisions. Use the word vision when you're speaking about the future and as a part of decision making. So be very intentional about these terms so that you can build that culture into the volunteer teams around you as well. They'll help support you in that and maybe hold you accountable. And then lastly, I want to talk about board meeting strategy. So again, hopefully, though your question is about the single staff pastor, I hope you still have at least a small team of senior decision makers that come alongside you. And this is a great Scott Ball, I think, strategy for boards is that don't just have, I mean, if you're meeting once a month and you just cram everything into that meeting, we would suggest start meeting twice a month and have kind of a business meeting and then have a separate vision, prayer, care, shepherding, oversight meeting. And so that you're not making decisions on strategy or, operations. You're only spending time together in the word, in prayer, thinking about high level visionary things and mission related things. So I think that's another practical way to try to build and maintain strategy and vision in the church as a single staff pastor. Thanks for that question. That was a really good one.
Yeah, it's really good. Really, really relevant to, I know, a lot of people who listen to the podcast. All right, my next question comes from Lee. Lee asks, what is the role of spiritual formation in revitalization, and how does it become an ongoing catalyst rather than a revival or camp type experience that fades after the initial revitalization process concludes? We had several questions similar to this one, essentially asking the question of like, what is the spiritual component? Because we talk a lot about, well, it's in the intro to every episode.
Practical, actionable
topics to help churches thrive. So we really live in that space because I think we take for granted that we know you guys are dedicated to developing yourselves spiritually. You're in the Word, you're praying. And so we're trying to address topics that we think are pain points for you. And so I think if you have could have a criticism of the podcast, it's that maybe we don't talk enough about spiritual formation and the spiritual side of strategic planning as much as we should. So I wanted to address Lee's question, and there were, again, several of you who had a similar one. And it's a great question. I think the first thing to remember is that the goal of any strategic envisioning or strategic planning or revitalization process is ultimately the revitalization of individual people. The spiritual formation of individual people. It's very easy in the midst of a process to get lost in the weeds and think about the mechanics of programming and budgets and what the strategy is and what are our targets and our metrics. And Lee, you're right. In when you're in that season, everybody's kind of very excited about the change and the new things that are happening. And when you get out of that initial excitement phase, the baby that sometimes gets thrown out with the bathwater is the focus and heart for spiritual formation. So, in answer to your question, I think number one, remember that the focus is always ultimately on the individual and their spiritual formation. And the whole point of a discipleship pathway isn't just to streamline programs, but it's to produce discipleship fruit. That's the goal. That's why we do that process in the first place. And so keeping constant attention as elders in particular to shepherd the flock and to measure spiritual fruit. Do we see it? And when we stop seeing the spiritual fruit we want to see, that's an indicator that we need to do more work on looking at what it is that we're doing in our programming. So measuring discipleship fruit at the individual level is number one. The second thing is commitment to prayer at every level is very, very important. AJ, you already mentioned this in the answer to your last question, but ensuring that you have healthy rhythms at the board level is extremely important. So strategic planning should not be a moment, it should be a habit. So I hope that every year you mark out time to set goals, to refresh the vision, to decide on strategic projects. The elders should be doing that every year because they're the directional leadership of the church. But every month they should be in prayer for the church and have dedicated time doing that. And beyond that, I hope you have a prayer team at the church and passing along prayer requests, sharing those, and having a culture of prayer, so that there's a constant eagerness and a hunger for the Holy Spirit to be present and visible and speaking through the people in the church. And which would kind of lead me to the third and final thing, which I've sort of already said, but I want to reiterate. The revitalization process is not a one-time thing. It shouldn't be. And I know who Lee is, so I'll say this in a way that he'll resonate. It's about continuous improvement. So we should not be looking at a revitalization process as a one and done thing. One way to make sure that we're constantly focused on the right things is making sure that we are in a process of continuous improvement and a continual focus on revitalizing always, because the laws of thermodynamics are at work in our hearts and in our churches. If we leave it to our own devices, it's going to decline. It's going to fall at the spiritual level and at the structural level and the strategic level. Therefore, we must always be in a process of revitalization, and it's incumbent on the leadership to say, we are not a church that did revitalization and we're done. We are constantly being renewed day by day by the water of the word, right? And by the blood of Jesus. So it's this Romans philosophy, right? We're trying to continually be renewed in our minds. So revitalization is that. It's a spiritual process that's ongoing all the time, and it's the leadership that sets the tone through prayer and through intentional strategic leadership every year. So that'd be my answer.
That's really good. All right. Our last question for this episode comes from Trent. And he asks, what are some practical and strategic...
Your last question.
Oh, this isn't our last one? You have one more after me, after this?
You went first.
Oh.
Don't cut me short.
All right.
Bro.
What are some practical and strategic ways to get people to see the importance of preparing for potential growth in the church before it happens, so you aren't caught off guard or left unprepared when growth does happen? So yeah, this is really good. And I've heard this asked before, I think with someone on a team at a church that I was working with, but I got a couple of things that come to mind for this question. The first one is considering, again, the discipleship pathway, or the organization of ministries in the church to disciple people in an effective and efficient way. So what I'm thinking about in that respect is asking, so I guess let me preface this by saying my answer to your question comes in a couple of forms of evaluation, determining where are we now. And with some kind of strategy in the question that we're asking, it kind of will lead us to the answer of, oh, maybe we need to do something different. So, and I'm also not thinking about asking or presenting this to the entire church. This is more of a leadership question, I think, initially, whether, it's paid staff or whether it's volunteer leaders, but looking at our discipleship pathway. So what I'm asking there is, what would we do with new people? This is like a fundamental question. Somebody new comes to our church and we want them hopefully to desire greater engagement and assimilation into the culture and the ministries of the church. But if they actually came and they were so bold to say, how can I get engaged here? What would you think I should do first? We need to have an answer for that. So what are we going to direct them to? What ministries are we going to direct them to help them engage? So asking this of yourself forces you then to look critically then at what you're doing. So, which then you're either going to feel like you're prepared or you're not prepared. And that hopefully would drive action. The second part of that is in systems. And what I'm asking there is, how do we get them there? So perhaps, we would say, it would be great for you to join a small group here at our church. Well, what does that process look like? We would call that that's a system for the process that somebody would move through to go from point A to point B. Who do they talk to? Or is there some kind of, questions that we would love to have them answer to find the best fit for them? Could be any number of things, but That's the second half of my answer, is evaluating the systems that you have in your church for being able to move people into the next best step that you've designed for them. Mm-hmm. Asking these things then of your closer leaders and people that are leading ministries in your church will force this perspective investigation. And if the answers to these questions come back, well, I guess we don't really have major organization in our ministries. We've just kind of always been doing this stuff and we got a lot going on. Or no, we really don't have anybody that we would be able to direct them to, or we don't have any kind of processes for that. Well, this then sets you up for this conversation. Should we, before we attempt to grow the church, should we establish some fundamental things so that when, not if, but when that growth begins to happen, we are ready to go and we're not caught off guard, as your question suggested. So I hope that's helpful, Trent. This is some great strategy planning elements right here that certainly fall within the framework of our strategic envisioning process. So we've got resources to help think through these things in the toolkit, or certainly working with one of our guides on this process would bring these things up to the surface and ready to tackle. Thanks for that, Trent.
Yeah, man. Just really briefly, I had
what, Scott? You're going to chime in on this question?
I'm just so briefly. I just want to tell a story. I was at a church recently that has struggled, and anyways, so I love this church. They're fantastic. But when I was there, someone came up to me and they said, "You new? Are you new here?" And I said, "Yep." And they go, "What? Are you friends with someone who goes here?" Or and I
why would you be here?
I said, "No, I'm Scott Ball. I'm leading the strategic envisioning process. I've been working with a team of your leaders doing some strategic planning this weekend." They go, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." I mean, they were so shocked that they didn't recognize me, So they were really sweet. It was totally fine. But I go, yeah. So I don't know. With Trent's question, I was thinking, maybe start working on the culture, creating like a culture of expectation. Expect to grow. Expect that there be someone who's new, so that maybe that when people walk up to them, they don't go, "Did someone invite you? Like, what are you doing here?
How could you possibly have stumbled into this place?
How did you get to this place?" Yeah. Okay. My last question comes from Sam. Sam asks, should church strategy / implementation always lead to numerical growth? And that's a really good question. And so, Sam, I would say it should always lead to growth. But you can define what that looks like and what that means. We focus essentially on church health. That's the thing that we care most about in our process is health, the health of the church. And numerical growth can come in healthy and unhealthy ways. Churches can be unhealthy and they can grow numerically, and they can be healthy and grow numerically. And we covered this actually in a recent article and podcast. I think we talked about why unhealthy churches sometimes grow. So that's a good one about that. But I would say that it's inevitable that when a church is healthy, it will grow. Now, I can have some caveats around that. That could mean that the church, it becomes really focused on church planting, and you create this culture where you're constantly planting churches. This is how Paul dealt with church growth in the New Testament, is they were hyper focused on always launching the next church in the next town. But it only happened because there were healthy churches that could provide that to happen. So I don't want to go so far as to say a strategic planning process, a good one, always will lead to just, you're going to have to add 5 services and you're going to have to plant 18 campuses. And if you're not seeing those kinds of exponential growth numbers, then that means that the process didn't work or that it was ineffective, because that's not true. But a good strategic planning process does always cultivate healthier soil. And when there is healthier soil, there is always more fruit. And when it comes to gospel-centered churches, which I know who Sam is, and I know you all are, gospel-centered churches share the gospel. And when people share the gospel, people come to know Jesus, which means there's more people in the kingdom. So it's a very long and circuitous answer of saying yes, actually. I think it does lead to numerical growth, but there's a ton of context and nuance around that. And just because you aren't seeing that fruit immediately doesn't mean the process isn't working. Some plants take much longer to grow. I mean, you can plant an apple tree and it's going to be years before the first apple, grows on the tree that you can eat. That doesn't mean that it isn't working. But eventually, when the soil is healthy and the plant is tended to, there will be fruit. It's inevitable. It must happen. And I think that's true in churches. I'd actually would, AJ, kind of like your thought on that before we wrap up.
No, I think you covered. Well, Scott, I was sitting here thinking, I'm just not going to say anything because we agreed we weren't going to say anything about it. But I really don't have much more to say to you.
That was the last question.
My short answer to this would have been yes. I would expect the church to grow for the reasons that you just gave as you're wrapping up that question. Healthy things grow. Yeah. Now, what you call a lot of growth would be, that would depend on where you are. I think in only extreme cases based on geography, a healthy church will grow. What that trend line looks like for you depends, but I think
even in those circumstances, you could be developing a culture where like pastors are being raised up, and you're sending missionaries, or you're sending, young men to go to seminary and be trained, and you know what I mean. Like that's growth too. So I mean, there's caveats around it, I suppose. But when you have healthy soil and you're tending a plant, there's going to be fruit. That you almost can't stop that from happening, right?
I believe so. I believe that to be true. Yeah. I mean, yeah. In rare cases, we've got the tiny little church in the middle of a cornfield, and there's a handful of farmers that live within an hour's drive. Outside of those types of scenarios,
I've worked with those churches, and they grow too.
I think there's the opportunity for healthy churches to grow. Yeah.
So I guess, but I don't want anyone to be discouraged if you go, well, I'm not seeing the numbers yet. Okay, keep tending the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, I mean, this is Jesus' principle. It's like so keep sowing seed. Not all of the seed that you throw is going to grow, but some of it will.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you don't give up. You don't go, wow, I'm not seeing the fruit yet, so it didn't work. It's like, no, well, the worst time to stop tending the plant is the day before you start to see it sprout from the ground, right? You never see it. So if you abandon it, so just, and I'm not saying this is actually, I don't think this is happening in this particular church. I'm saying to you, listener, if you feel like, man, we've worked really hard on this and we're just not seeing the fruit, doesn't matter. I'm telling you, it's inevitable. Fruit comes from healthy soil. Tend to the soil. Don't care about the fruit. That's what Jesus says. He's like, find laborers for the harvest. Don't forget about the harvest. Just find laborers for the harvest, and the harvest is going to happen.
Run the race, complete the task. There you
Amen.
go. All right.
That's a good way, I think, to wrap up episode 300, my friend.
Yeah. Man, thank you guys so much for listening. I don't know if there's maybe a human exists within the sound of my voice that has been here since the beginning. God bless you for your long suffering and patience as we developed into something useful, hopefully for your ministry. But we truly are thankful that you tune in and listen. We exist to help you, and we exist because you care about your church. And because you care about your church, you look for help and you want to do better. You want to be on mission and you want to see the kingdom of God grow. And for that, we're dedicated to helping you, and we're going to keep at it as long as you'll have us. So thanks so much again for your questions. Very thoughtful, very meaningful. And we'll be back again, Lord willing, with you next week, starting with 301 and beyond. See you then.